Uh, um, Welcome to the guide on how to get big and strong. Basically, this is the lifting for size and strength guide, going over all of the basic terms that you need to know about lifting. Basically, a lot of people nowadays, fitness has become a trend. The gym has become a trend. Everybody and their fucking mom or freaking mom knows how to they're trying to get in the gym. Everybody's trying to get in the gym, and that's good. That's great. That's amazing. But a lot of people just seem to not know what they're doing. So that's really what this guide is for, is to basically help you figure out what you're doing. And it's basically these basic principles that people have been using for years, centuries, like classical Silver Age bodybuilders, especially Golden Age bodybuilders, everything. These are like the objective, basic, not even techniques, but just principles. There's some progression techniques in here, but it's just basic terms and principles that you need to follow to maintain a structure in your training. Because if there's no structure, then you're basically wasting your time. And that's what this is all about, is saving time. Because by following the correct principles, you're going to be saving time. So you could, in theory, be very consistent and adhere to your made up random ass workout. But the problem with that is, if you don't have belief and confidence in the principles and know what principles you're applying, then you're going to be doing something that may not be the most optimal. And when I say optimal, I don't mean a science-based way, but I mean not the most optimal as in you're just doing shit without knowing like the bro science, basically. It's the difference between EMG studies and all that shit and bro science. This is basically what it is. It's a little bit of bro science, a little bit of science, but it's just the basic stuff that you need to know. Okay, so the levels to lifting: there's the beginner, novice, intermediate, advanced, and elite. Nobody who's watching this guide is really going to be able to ever get to the elite stage, because it takes not only a combination of good genetics, but also making a career out of lifting, making a life out of lifting, and having that specialty and having that specific set of genetics. So nobody's really going to get to that elite stage. Advanced can be achieved after many years. Intermediate, that means you're a lifter. Once you become an intermediate lifter, that means that you know what you're doing and it took effort to get there. Novice, a lot of people are stuck in the novice stage. The novice stage is where 99% of the average gym goers are stuck at, is in the novice stage, and they can't get out of that stage because they're not knowing what principles to apply and how to apply those principles. None of this has to do with your size or your strength numbers. You can be the biggest fucking person on the planet, but you could still be a novice, and that's because of a combination of genetics and, like I said, adherence. So Beginner means you don't know anything. If you're a beginner, you have no idea what you're doing. So you basically are just like brand new to fitness. You've never barely been in the gym. You don't know anything. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the beginner. Okay, so beginners have low adherence, low work capacity, and they need to start small. And this is because you're starting off with a new habit. So fitness is becoming a new habit, and you have to learn to become emotionally bought into this habit. And what does that mean? What does emotional buy-in mean? Emotional buy-in is this concept of caring about the gym, of saying, okay, this is what I want to do, and setting time aside and prioritizing that time. That's really what it's about, because fitness is a habit, and you have to make a habit out of it to make progress. And that's where that word adherence comes in. Adherence simply means the ability to stick to something. So if you have low adherence, which is what beginners will always start off with, that means you have no ability to stick to anything. Adherence can be a characteristic of the person, but more commonly, adherence can also be the characteristic of the program or of the movement. So for example, an exercise may have low adherence if you don't like doing it. That means you're lowly adhered to the exercise and you're not sticking to it. So we're going to move into this case study right here with prisoners. Now, prisoners have an abundance of time and they have minimal equipment. But the one thing that people always say, oh, he went to prison, he came out, he got jacked. What is this phenomenon? Are they having steroids in there? Maybe, but their nutrition in prison is terrible. Even when they trade shit in prison, their nutrition is terrible. So how are these guys getting so big? Well, it's one, an abundance of time, and two, adherence, because these guys are keeping themselves occupied with exercise. They're literally entertaining themselves by doing push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups all day long. And if you did that shit all day long, the most basic brain dead programming all day long for years, these guys are in there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years plus, you will get jacked. Your body will just respond to that stimulus, even if you're not following any of the other principles here. So if anything that you learn from this guide, the number one thing you need to learn is adherence and consistency. Adherence is consistency, is the direct precursor to consistency. So that's the key word. The two keywords, adherence and consistency. Sticking to your process, even if it's not the best, and working through it and working with it. Now, that doesn't mean if you have a shit process, an unoptimal process, you should always stick with it, because then you're wasting your time. Because what could be done in 5, 10, 15, 20 years can be cut down to 2 years, to 1 year even. Because these prisoners, with that amount of consistency and discipline, with proper equipment, they could get so much bigger. But they don't have all that fancy stuff. They don't have all those fancy machines, etc. Okay, moving on to food and sleep. Food and sleep are the two most important things, and hydration. Now, we're not really talking about eating super clean here, eating on a vegetarian diet, eating salads all day. That's if you're in a specific situation with your diet where you're trying to lose weight, okay? If food and sleep in general are two things that you have to keep in check even outside of a gym lifestyle. And that's the thing about lifting, is it's also a lifestyle change, because you're taking the time for the gym out of your day. It should be at least a scheduled block in your day. And then on top of that, you're sleeping well. You have good sleep quality. You have a good amount of calories and a good amount of protein. Above all, it doesn't, in all honesty, this is one subjective statement. It doesn't really matter the quality of the food as long as you're digesting it well. It has enough protein and it has enough calories for your needs. If you're trying to lose weight, then that food quality is automatically going to be better, because better quality food has better macros, and that's just a fact. Worse quality food, more processed food, is going to have worse macros. But if your goal is to gain weight, then you can eat food, quote unquote, of a lesser quality to gain weight and put on mass. So that could be a controversial statement, but like, for example, Bald Omni Man, who's a big inspiration of mine, he eats 2 peanut butter and jellies in the morning. Okay, 2 peanut butter and jellies. If you told one of those like little skinny fit girls to eat 2 peanut butter jellies in the morning, they'd probably cry, okay? Because they're going to say, oh my God, that's going to make me so fat. 2 peanut butter and jellies. That is like, the quality of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich could be questionable. So that's just a little note on food quality. But back to food and sleep. So obviously we talked about food. Sleep is where your body is recovered. Now, to clear up one very quick slight misconception, I think I'll talk about it later in the presentation, but muscle is built away from the gym. This is just a fact. If you didn't know this, you need to know this right now. Muscle isn't built during training. Muscle is built in the time away from the gym. Training is stimulus to growth, not growth itself. Growth itself is almost synonymous with recovery, which is what food and sleep support. Food and sleep support recovery. Okay? And then hydration. You need electrolytes. Water with a little bit of salt. I didn't know if you knew this, because I didn't know shit about electrolytes. Salt is an electrolyte. Magnesium is an electrolyte, and potassium is an electrolyte. So get electrolytes, because you need electrolytes for your body to absorb the water. Because without electrolytes, the water will go straight through you and it won't get to your muscles, okay? So that's quick. Food, sleep, hydration. Those are 2 very important things. And then we talked about recovery, and muscle is built away from the gym. And, how to be consistent as possible and adhere to a simple bodyweight routine. for months, you're ready to set foot in the actual weight room. So now it's time to play. And basically this means you're going to be trying all the machines, learning all the textbook perfect form as possible, and just really learning the ins and outs of the gym and learning all the different exercises and everything. So experimentation as a beginner and as a novice is very important. Testing out how your body responds to things, what you like, what you dislike, etc. Okay, so the summary for the beginner stage of lifting is always, for every single stage, ensure your recovery is in check, your hydration, diet, sleep, and stress is one big factor that I forgot to talk about, because the way stress interacts with your hormones and your energy levels really affects your recovery from the stimulus of training. And then, after you have your recovery in check, basically step one of being a beginner is acquiring this new habit and prioritizing exercise. And then step two is starting off slow, adhering to a bodyweight routine. Step three is learning the proper form and basic terms such as sets and reps in the gym, and then experimenting and discover as much of the gym as possible. And you're also going to be, alongside your training and your experimentation, you're going to be wanting to consume as much things like this, as many guides as possible, as much information as possible, really in the beginner stage of lifting, so that once you get on to the novice stage and intermediate stages, you're really focused on actually just lifting instead of seeking out the correct information all the time. So entering the gym with a proper knowledge base is always going to put you ahead of the beginner who doesn't know what they're doing. But one thing to be said is, if you are only consuming and you're not putting your body in the gym and experimenting, the person who's always experimenting is going to learn more and grow more and respond more and have more knowledge than the person who is only reading articles and consuming information. And this is one of the problems with social media, where you see a lot of people think they know what they're talking about when it comes to TikTok information and stuff like that, but they're not actually applying themselves in the gym. And that's the number one most important thing. That goes back to adherence, and that goes back to consistency. So moving forward, now we're on the novice stage. I would say, like I said before, 99% of the general gym population, if you go to a commercial gym, they're all novices. Every single person in the gym, like in a commercial gym, is usually a novice, and then you pick out the three or four, five big guys in a commercial gym. They're usually going to be intermediates or maybe even advanced level lifters. But most of the time you see people, you see the way that they train, and you can tell, okay, this person is still a novice, and they're a novice for life. And a lot of people are in this trap. So we're going to go over some diagrams now here. So here we have the stairway to gains. So welcome to the stairway to gains. This is the first step. The first step to the stairway is a routine. And then after you've decided on a routine that you want to follow, is adherence to that routine, which is directly correlated to consistency, and consistency leads to progress. And progress not meaning results, but progress meaning weight on the bar for each movement, which is, we're going to talk about progressive overload, which is very important. And progress is a metric of growth, which is at the top of the pyramid or the staircase. So it goes routine, adherence, consistency, progress, growth. So having a routine, sticking to the routine, which means you're being consistent to the routine. And I separated adherence and consistency because with low adherence comes no consistency. Like, adherence is almost the prologue to consistency. You can think of it that way. And consistency to your routine directly leads to progress, which is a metric of growth. So that's the stairway to gains that I made. So then when you're a novice, this could be debated. I feel like some people would debate this, but I would say you have to choose a split so that you can really get introduced to the programming pillars. Now, then again, you could just stay consistent on your own process, but as soon as you have some sort of consistency, there's going to come some sort of structure, and that structure is going to come in the form of a split, even if it's an unknowledgeable split, which is what most people run, such as a bro split or an auto-regulated split, which we'll get into. But Now that you've become accustomed to the gym environment after your beginner stage, it's time to start a novice split. And you're going to be using the 3 pillars. I don't know if people call them the 3 pillars. I don't know if I heard that somewhere, but it's really just, I think I heard that somewhere, but it's really just the 3 pillars of workout programming. And you're going to want to progressively overload. And you really need to learn what progressively overloading is. And it's a very important term when it comes to the novice stage of lifting. Once you get to intermediate and advanced stages of lifting, progressive overload becomes sort of just a phenomenon in the background that you don't really have to think about. But you do want to start thinking about progressive overload, especially in the novice stage, and you want to at least know what it is. So split is how you split up your training, or usually over a 7-day week. If you're more advanced, there will be 8, 9, even 10-day week splits. And all that means is your work days and your rest days and what you're working. So an upper-lower split would be upper-lower, rest, upper-lower. That's usually the most common. That would have you working out 4 times on, 3 times off. Full body, usually for beginners, would be 2, maybe 3 times a week for beginners. So it would go rest, full body, and then you can do for 2 times a week, rest, rest, full body, rest, rest. I think that adds up to 7. I'm not doing the math. But there's also 3 times a week full body, and then more advanced 4 times a week full body, which is asynchronous. All that means is that a synchronous training split just means that Monday is always the same day. This is how you can think about it. So a synchronous full body split would mean that Monday is always going to be full body, is always going to be on. But an asynchronous split would mean that every Monday might be different. That's really all it means. There's nothing too intricate about it, but you're not going to be using an asynchronous split as a novice, in my opinion. It's just too complicated for novices to keep track of that. Then there's push-pull legs, which is kind of a novice trap and can lead to a spider physique, which we'll talk about. And then a bro split. There's nothing wrong with a bro split. What people find a lot about bro split, basically what a bro split is you're training every single muscle 1 time a week on each day. So every single day gets its own muscle, or every single muscle gets its own day. There's nothing really wrong about it. It's really hated on because it's not optimal. And that, again, where the word optimal is really just attributed to how much work can we get done in the minimum amount of time. And the thing about a bro split is, in terms of time, it's not optimal because you're wasting your time when you're not applying the fullest amount of principles. And that's what a bro split does, because it has no frequency. The frequency is 1x. It's terrible. But the thing is, people like bro splits because they're easy to program. They're probably the easiest shit to program out of anything. And people just like killing their muscles on every single day. And if you like that, then that's high adherence, which leads to high consistency. Back to the stairway of gains. High consistency is progress, which leads to growth. So that's why there is no completely correct split. It's really just what you adhere to. And that's where experimentation as a beginner, if you want to experiment with different splits, but then you have to decide on one. Because program hopping is a big novice trap, and we'll get into novice traps, but program hopping is a big novice trap and is what keeps people in the novice stage, because you're not making progress and adhering to one split. Okay, that was a lot. So moving on to progressive overload. Progressive overload, or simply as I call it, progress, which some people may call progress growth, but really they go in tandem. All these principles go in tandem with one another. So progressive overload is... Who the fuck is yelling? So whether for novices, it's going to be adding weight. That's the simplest way to progressive overload. And then comes adding reps, which is another simple way. You can also add sets, which is, I wouldn't recommend progressing through sets as a novice. But you could, and then which is just doing more volume overall. And you can also, this is just a quick little tidbit, progressive overload can also apply to your diet. So if you're switching diets, it probably wouldn't be smart to go from a cutting diet of 1,000 calories a day to a bulking diet of 5,000 calories, which that just means gradually increasing your calories over time as so to progressively overload your digestive system and get your body accustomed to the new intake of calories. Okay, exercise selection. This is something I added on to this novice section just recently. So the exercises themselves are a key component of the program. Without the exercises, there's no training stimulus. This is really the part of application, is through the exercise. So there's going to be 3 things we're going to talk about: hypertrophy, athleticism, and strength. This guide is for recreational, not competitive, because competitive programming is very complex, and I'm not knowledgeable enough about competitive programming to know what it's like, but I know as far as recreational programming is very simple. The difference between recreational programming, here's a quick tidbit, is competitive programming has peaking phases, so it's much more blocked. So there's going to be phases where you're accustoming your body to the new volume, and then you're peaking, and then you're deloading and all that. And you could do that as a recreational lifter, but you could argue that there's no need to peak and deload as a recreational lifter. And that goes back to optimality and being in a time crunch and just doing what's best in terms of time. Where a deload may seem like a waste of time for a recreational lifter, in my opinion, but of course I take deloads. So for hypertrophy is going to be stable lifts. We'll get to what that means later. For athleticism, functional lifts, which have less stability. And then for strength is going to be the specific lifts. We'll talk about specificity in a moment, which is for squat, bench, and deadlift. And when people refer to strength, they usually refer to the maximum amount of weight you can do for a certain amount of reps, usually underneath the 4 rep range. So that would be a single, a double, and a triple. So, and then in a powerlifting sense, it's always going to be a 1 rep max. So a bench 1 rep max, you're talking strength. Because maxing out 100% on a lift like a squat, bench, or deadlift is going... I gotta take a breather. Is going to affect your hypertrophy training. Let me say that again. Maxing out 100% weight capacity for a squat, bench, deadlift is going to affect your hypertrophy training negatively. And that's because of how harsh maxing out can be on the joints and how much recovery maxing out takes. That's why there's a debate about power building, but we're not going to get on to this. That's too much tangents. So the amount of extra muscles used to keep the body from moving and engage target muscle. That's my definition of stability. Basically, all stability means in terms of an exercise is the less stable an exercise is, the more stabilizing muscles it has to use to keep your body from moving against the resistance and targeting the same muscle. So I have the comparison here of a preacher curl versus a military press. But instead, I'm going to have you think about standing on a yoga ball, or here, laying your back on a yoga ball and bench pressing versus bench pressing on the floor, which is like basically a floor press is like extremely stable. So what is the difference? Is you're using your quads, you're using your calves even, your hamstrings, your glutes, your abs, maybe even some of your lower back, your neck to stabilize your body, to hold itself in the position to push the weight when you're laying on a yoga ball to bench press. Now, when you're laying on the floor, if you're doing a flat-legged floor press, you're not using your quads, you're not using any of your lower body. Maybe you're using your glutes a little bit if you're squeezing them and you know proper bench form. You're not using your neck, you're not using all those extra muscles. So realistically, it just means that your body is using more of its energy and its assets on the target muscle, so you can easier hit the target muscle and hypertrophy it. Now, for athleticism, the less stability, it can be argued the better, because athletes need to know how to use their entire body in tandem, and that's exactly what an unstable lift does, is it teaches you how to use your whole body in tandem. Okay, now we get to the 3 types of exercises. We have compound, isolation, and accessory exercises. A compound exercise, in simple terms, means that it uses multiple muscles at once. Now, what's the difference between this and unstable exercise? Well, that floor press is using the target muscles. That's the key word. Stabilizer muscles versus target muscles. A bench press targets the triceps, front deltoid, a little bit of side deltoid, which could be considered a stabilizer, and the chest. Another way to look at compound movements, rather than muscles, a compound movement uses multiple joints. You'll sometimes hear people say multi-joint movement. So a bench press is going to be using the shoulder joint and the elbow joint. Same thing with a military press, shoulder joint and elbow joint. Same thing with a squat is going to be your hips, which can act as a joint, and then your knees. Whereas an isolation exercise uses one muscle and one joint. So a bicep curl is only using your elbow joint and is only using your bicep. It will be using your forearms to stabilize and hold the weight. Then we have an accessory, an accessory movement. People wrongly use this term for hypertrophy. An accessory movement is strongly related to strength. An accessory movement is a strength term. What accessory means is it's a lift that's specific to another lift. A lift that is basically a variation of another lift that is secondary to it, that is engaging certain parts of that lift in a different way. So, for example, dumbbell bench press is going to be an accessory to a flat bench press. Why? Because a dumbbell bench press has an extended range of motion, so it's targeting a certain portion of the chest more than a barbell bench press. And that's basically one quick tip if you want to increase your bench. If you've only been doing flat barbell bench, maybe throw in some dumbbell bench, and you're going to be stretching that chest more, and it will always have positive correlation towards your bench press. What is an example of a non-accessory movement? Well, a bicep curl isn't really an accessory. It's an isolation. Those two can be the same thing, and they are sometimes very different things. So a bicep curl, in terms of of quote-unquote being an accessory, it's not really an accessory to anything because it's not specific to any strength lift, the squat, bench, or deadlift. Okay, moving forward. The stretch, contraction, then we got range of motion, isometrics. So the stretch portion of the exercise is exactly what it is, the stretch. So the bottom of a bench press, the bottom of a bicep curl. Now I think about it, for most exercises, it's usually going to be the bottom, like the quote-unquote bottom of the exercise. So, like, the bottom of a squat is going to be the stretched position of the squat. It's usually going to be the quote-unquote bottom. Now I think about it, but it's whenever the muscle is stretched under tension. That's important, because just doing free stretches is not going to do anything. But also doing stretches with weight is not going to do anything. So it's a stretch under tension during an exercise. Okay. So then the contraction is the exact opposite, the top of the exercise. The top of the bench press, when your chest is squeezing completely at the top to keep the weight up there, the top of the bicep curl. The contraction is when the muscle is ultimately contracted and the fibers are close together. That's another thing, the muscle fibers. So the stretch is when the muscle fibers are at their full length. The contraction is when the muscle fibers are squeezed. Then we got range of motion. In terms of range of motion for novices, I would recommend always using full range of motion. But Sam Sulek has recently popularized long length partials, which just means doing partial reps, which aren't full range of motion reps, under the stretched position. This is nothing new, but he really made it popular, and there's nothing wrong with that. But either way, you have to stick to one, adherence, and be consistent. And then isometrics, nobody really does those anymore. Isometrics just means staying in a certain position of exercise, usually the contracted position of exercise, against an immovable resistance. Not always an immovable resistance. This is what Bruce Lee did. So, for example, pushing your body against the house and contracting as hard as possible. Maybe that's a bad. Trying to bicep curl a handrail that's bolted into the ground. That's an example of a Bruce Lee type isometric. A more applicable isometric is a plank because there's no movement going on. It's basically where you're just standing still under tension. Okay, now here's the big mama. Every single program, in terms of being optimal for size and strength, should have a horizontal push, a vertical press, a horizontal row, vertical pull, tricep push, blah, blah, blah. Read it all. Basically, at the top 4, we have the horizontal and the verticals, push, press, row, pull. So, in terms of a push, how I like to coin it, or how I like to term it, is a push is going to be horizontal. That's going to be your chest, triceps, shoulders. And then vertical is going to be your overhead press, which is going to be your shoulders and your triceps. Then horizontal row is going to be your upper back and your lats. Vertical pull is going to be mostly your lats. Then tricep push, which is going to be a tricep push down for that lateral head. And then a tricep extension for the long head. Supinated versus pronated bicep curls. 2 different variation bicep curls. Basically, it means underhand, overhand. The biggest way to remember it is supinated. When you're holding a bowl of soup, your palms are facing up. When you're holding a bowl of soup, your palms are facing up. That's supinated. Then pronated is the other one. So palms facing up, that's the normal, traditional bicep curl. That's supinated. Pronated is the other way. And it shouldn't really even be called a bicep curl. That's just what we call it. But it really targets your brachii and your brachioradialis. Then a squat pattern. That's just your traditional squat. Any variation of that, including a lunge. I think they would probably say that a lunge is a different movement pattern on its own. But anyways, a hip hinge pattern, which means hinging at your hips, which means bending over. That's basically it. Knee flexion, which means flexing your knee extension. I don't even know if these are right, but one of them, knee flexion is like a bicep curl for your leg. So that's your hamstring curl. Then knee extension is the opposite. So it's like your quads. So your quads are like the triceps of your legs, and your hamstrings are like the biceps of your legs. And it's raining now. So shit. Okay, and then a calf raise, then abs isolation. Then you could put neck and then traps isolation, but that you don't really, Okay. Okay, progressive overload. You must ensure you're progressively overloading in some way over a week-to-week period, because as a novice, progressive overload is the easiest possible principle to know because you're following a linear progression. And without progressive overload, there's no progress, so you're not going to grow. And here's the thing. Progressive overload is really a controversial topic because what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And what I'll say is this. Progressive overload, as far as we can tell, somebody home? No. Oh, wait, that might be my mom. Nope, it's not. Progressive overload, as far as we can tell, is going for, at least for a novice, it may seem like progressive overload is the stimulant to growth, but you just don't know how strong you are as a novice and as a beginner. You don't know what your top end is. You don't know what your body's capable of. So once you really get into lifting and you know what your body's capable of, progressive overload becomes this. It becomes a sign of growth and not the other way around. That's kind of my belief. And it's really debated from what I've heard from many different coaches and people online and like that. And it's like, what comes first, chicken or egg? And that goes for progressive overload and growth. But anyways, we know this is you can't force it, but it does have to be monitored in some way and kind of treated. So it's like when you have an experiment and you're doing a treatment to the group in the experiment, you're not going to force results out of that group, but you're going to monitor like the treatment that you've administered to the group, if that makes sense. You're not going to force the treatment group to show results, but you're going to monitor the treatment group who had the treatment. I don't know if that analogy made sense, but anyways, you got to track your workouts. You have to track your workouts. If you're not doing this, this is another novice trap. I see so many people going in the gym, lifting the same weight, doing the same thing, and the weight gets easier. It gets easier if you're lifting the same weight over and over again. It has to get harder. So I'm going to quote somebody who's very controversial in the industry, but makes a good point. Train harder than last time. But I'm going to add something to this. Train harder than last time, if applicable. So basically, train harder than last time. You got to use you can use apps. That's why I use Boost Camp. Or you can use a pen and paper, which is more versatile, and many of the old school guys use pen and paper, so it's really up to you. Then we have My Love Croton. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but Greek story that just shows progressive overload. He was a athlete in Greek, carried a calf with him on his back all day. He grew and the calf grew at the same time. So the stimulus grew as he grew as the calf grew. Without this growing stimulus, his size and strength would have stagnated and he wouldn't have grown to this massive size that he became. So, newbie gains. This is the definition of novice. Maybe. Because, again, all these terms are kind of subjective, kind of not. It's really, everything, all the information, it's all over the place, okay? So, as a novice, you're going to make around 60 to 75% of your genetically possible gains in a short 1 to 3 year period. I kind of made this up, kind of didn't. I've heard different percentages. I've heard 85, I've heard 90%. You're going to make up a good portion of your genetically possible gains in a very short amount of time, and it kind of sucks. Kind of sucks. As far as being a natural, this is what's true. And it's a steroid-like speed of progress during your first 1 to 3 years, or maybe even 6 months of lifting. And alongside these newbie gains comes linear progression. So let me go back to newbie gains. What is the definition of newbie gains? It just means noobs and people who are new to the stimulus of training are going to grow just like that. They're going to grow super fast. They're going to grow really big in a really short amount of time in proportion to the rest of their lifting career. Now, if you're a perma novice, then it might just seem like you're growing forever. But that just means that you're going to be really small in comparison to your genetic potential. And yeah, well, anyways, alongside newbie gains is linear progression. I don't know if people say that these are correlated, but I'm correlating them anyways because in terms of my lifting career, that they were correlated. So really big in a really short amount of time in proportion to the rest of their lifting career. Now, if you're a perma novice, then it might just seem like you're growing forever. But that just means that you're going to be really small in comparison to your genetic potential. And yeah, well, anyways, alongside newbie gains is linear progression. I don't know if people say that these are correlated, but I'm correlating them anyways because in terms of my lifting career, that they were correlated. So linear progression just means simply static rep range, adding weight on every set to an exercise week to week. So here's a basic linear progression model. So week 1, he does 65 pounds for 10, 70 pounds for 10, 75 pounds for 10, 80 pounds for 10, 85 pounds for 10. Adding 5 pounds every single week with the same rep range, which just means he's doing 10 reps, 3 sets every single week, adding 5 pounds. That's a linear progression. In the simplest, shittiest form possible, linear progression. Now, it's called linear because it's a straight line up. Then you're going to hit a wall. Your first plateau, usually as a novice, after probably like the 6th week, this guy probably couldn't bench more than 85 pounds. Because linear progression is real, but it's also kind of a fake. It's kind of a joke. Kind of doesn't really exist. It does exist, but a large portion of it doesn't exist. And here's why. You don't know how strong you are as a novice. You don't know what is your maximal weight. You could be a genetic phenom, this guy here, and he could get to a 135-pound bench press and actually feel it be hard and actually fail. Because if he's using a static rep range like this, his RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, never hit the top end because he was doing the same amount of reps for every single set during a session. And that's the thing about novices, is you haven't yet learned how to train hard. And that's okay. But because you haven't yet learned how to train hard, your RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, which just means how close you get to muscular failure in a set, is going to ramp up. And that's really what's progressing. At least in my head, and I've heard natural hypertrophy say the same thing. The RPE is actually what's going up, not the weight. So basically, this guy could have benched 85 pounds on week 1, but he didn't know that he could because he didn't know how hard or easy it would have felt. But also, linear progression does exist with the same RPE throughout. And I know I'm using this term RPE. RPE just means rate of perceived exertion, how close you are to muscular failure. I know I already said this, but basically it's on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being I can't get another rep, 9 being I could do one more rep, 8 being I could get 2 more, etc., etc. And then RIR, reps in reserve, is the opposite way. Some people like it better. 1 RIR means 1 rep in reserve, which means you're leaving 1 rep in the tank, so to speak. Okay, programming pillars. This is very important. Is programming pillars. Holy shit, we got a lot going here. All the way down to intermediate. Okay. Programming pillars. So as a novice, you are now introduced to 3 pillars which form a workout program. So you gotta learn what the pillars are, and you're gonna be using these a lot. And especially once you get to intermediate, you're gonna be dialing in these 3 pillars. And these 3 pillars might just even run your life if you're customizing your own program, like they did for me for a long time. So at the bottom of this temple, I would actually call it the programming temple, is adherence. Adherence, which is just another fancy precursor to consistency. So they go hand in hand. Consistency. It's harder to say fast. Then volume, intensity, and frequency. Those are the 3 pillars. Volume, intensity, and frequency. And then they make up the temple, which is a program. So the foundation is consistency. Then the pillars go up to the program. Okay. So right now you're going to learn a basic definition and a use case for each. So volume is how much training is performed. Frequency, how often a muscle or a movement, in terms of strength training, is trained throughout the week. So then intensity, how hard a movement is trained. People use intensity, again, it's just kind of a subjective term. People sometimes will call RPE or RIR intensity. That's really effort. And then people will call the percentage of your 1 rep maximum the intensity, which basically means how heavy. In terms of my definition for intensity, I would say it's a combination. It's how heavy and the effort level. So basically, volume is how much. How loud, you could say, because the more training it is, I guess the louder it would be. I guess that's how you could remember. Frequency is how often, how many, I guess you could say. How many times a week. So frequency is how many or how often times a week. But don't get it confused with volume, which is how much, but also how many sets per week. And then intensity is how hard. So how heavy, and also I could say the RPE and the RIR. The effort. So volume for novices. Volume is how much work is performed. High versus low. I don't have it on the slide here, but I'm just going to go out here and say it. In the conventional sense, volume, I guess a general rule, subjectively, you could say that less is more for volume. And again, in terms of this made-up thing that I just made up, optimality and saving time, less is more. And this is another thing, I'm going back citing natural hypertrophy, the 85% rule, blah, blah, blah. Less is more for volume. That doesn't mean do 1 set a week, but it means that if you're looking at a program and it looks like a lot, it probably is a lot, and it's probably too much. And there's probably going to be junk volume, and you're probably going to start sandbagging. Sandbagging is when you don't have enough work capacity and you get pooped out, and now you're just going through the motions. Going through the motions is when your RPE is nowhere near the top range, and you're not putting in any effort into each movement, and you're just going through the motions. And this is a novice trap. So higher volume at the same intensity requires more recovery. So higher volume versus lower volume. So if you're doing high volume and high intensity, you're going to have less frequency. And that's just a quick introduction to how the pillars work together, or are supposed to work together. Because you could go all in for maybe 3 days, and then you're going to have to fall asleep for like a week after that. And I've done it, so don't make the same mistakes as me. So here's a quick example: sprinters versus marathon runners. Sprinters are using low volume training. Now, I know this isn't weight training, but these principles will still apply. They're using low volume training. They're not running as much as a marathon runner is, but it's higher intensity. That means their running is taking physically more effort and more toll on their muscles in a shorter amount of time than a marathon runner is. I know a marathon runner has to have mental discipline and all that, blah, 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 but sprinters are more jacked, okay? So, and they're more jacked because they're stimulating their muscles in a constricted sense, okay? So training for a higher 1 rep max is a use case of low volume. Now, this is kind of wrong. I don't know why I wrote that, so just forget that. Okay, anyways. Intensity for novice, how hard and how heavy. It's a measurement of 1 rep percentage. So, what percent of your 1 rep maximum is this set? And also, in addition, I would say RPE. Because some people say RPE is just the definition of intensity. I know this industry is really confusing. But it's for me, it's a combination. So, a 1 rep maximum, which would mean this is the strongest you are. This is the 1 rep you can do for a bench press, the heaviest rep possible. That is the highest form of intensity. So RPE, we already talked about it, the proximity to muscular failure, and then a 1 rep maximum is always going to be RPE 10. Now you could have a 1 rep maximum at RPE 8. So an RPE 8 1 rep maximum. That's all strength training bullshit. It gets really confusing. I'm really more of a size enthusiast and an aesthetics enthusiast, but training principles in terms of weight training really cross the line on the Venn diagram. But this is kind of getting towards that strength side of the Venn diagram. So anyways, high stimulus training requires high recovery. The more intense the training is, the more recovery you're going to need. Doing a 1 rep deadlift is going to need more recovery than doing 10 reps at RPE 5 on a deadlift. And that's just the fact. And training in the high range. Now, there's going to be a million studies. There's been a million studies about what's the most optimal RPE and how hard should you train. Just train close to failure. That's the best way to put it. Train close to failure and learn what failure is. That's another thing a novice should do. Novices don't really know what failure is, and it's going to take a while to figure it out. Failure is when you can't get another rep with the same form but a little bit sloppy. So that means if the rep you just did was sloppier than the rep before it, and now you're trying to do another one but you can't, then you're probably at muscular failure. Cheating on your form is a whole different ballgame. And then there's this talk about true muscular failure. Just use that definition of failure and we'll be good. Okay. Frequency for novices. How often? This is the simplest one. Once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. Anything more than that is getting into low intensity, low volume type stuff, or really low intensity type stuff, like doing 20 push-ups in the morning every single day. That's really low intensity, but it's really high frequency and not that high a volume. So here's the combinations. This is where we're going to kind of learn how these go together. So volume and intensity, high, frequency, low. I took this from Jeffrey Verity Schofield, by the way. So doing a high amount of stimulative training about once a week for a muscle. This is basically a bro split. So just destroying a muscle 1 time a week. And then there's volume and frequency, high, intensity, low. You're doing easy, lightweight, a lot, many times a week. This is I'd say this combination is really what you'd use when you're a beginner, because you're not pushing every single movement to failure and you're just learning the ins and out. This is when you're accustoming your body to a new movement, and also when you want to get used to a new movement and prime your nervous system to a new movement in a short period of time. Then we have intensity and frequency high, volume low. So doing really heavy weight multiple times per week. So like one set maxing out multiple times per week. This is good for strength. Not really for hypertrophy, and you're gonna kill your joints. So I mean, if you want to get really strong on like literally one lift really fast, I guess you could do this. But also in terms of hypertrophy, maybe leaning the intensity definition more to an RPE. So training close to failure many times per week with low sets. This is actually what I do. Is I take every single set to failure many times per week for each muscle part. So I only train 3 times per week. Now here's the thing. If in case you don't realize the definition of frequency, because I glossed over it, it's not how many times a week you train. It's how many times a week you train a muscle. 3 times a week for one muscle is really high frequency. 3 times a week may seem like not a lot, and people are like, yo, bro, don't you work out every day? No, I don't work out every day because I got to recover, because recovery is when you grow. But I have a good frequency for my muscles because I train every single muscle 3 times a week, bud. And I train it really hard, but I don't do a lot of sets. So yeah, this is actually kind of what I do. But in terms of intensity as a heavy definition, no, I'm not, or at least me, not maxing out one muscle every 3 times a week. Like, that's crazy. Okay, here's the novice traps. I gotta get more scholarly here. We're getting really deep into this, and I'm getting tired. So, unspecific goals. That basically means you don't know what you want. You don't know if you want to be strong or if you want to be big. And they can be similar, and they can work in tandem, or they can work really against each other. Because if you're trying to max out your bench press as soon as possible, that's not going to be best for your chest hypertrophy. You'll get chest gains, but that's not going to be best in terms of stimulating the other muscles for growth, etc., because of how your joints are working and all that. So you just want to have a goal, and you want to have one goal. If you want to get generally fit, then that's a goal. But what is generally fit to you? Like, what do you want to do with each movement? What do you want to do with your measurements? Measurements is a big key in terms of size training, because it's literally size. Measurements are size. Measurements in using the little measuring tape and wrapping it around your bicep, and also weight. So, using one pillar in your programming. A lot of people do this. A lot of people do a shit ton of volume, or a shit ton of frequency, or a shit ton of intensity, and don't use the other ones. This is what a bro split is. A bro split is using one pillar. This, again, is in terms of being optimal for this limited time we have on planet Earth. You can use one pillar for 12 years and you'll make gains. No, I shouldn't say that. You can use one pillar for 100 years and you can make gains. But we don't have 100 years. We have like 30 until we're old and gray. So, use 2 pillars. 2 pillars high, 1 pillar low. Okay, program hopping. Low adherence, low emotional buy-in. Hopping around, trying every little thing, staying in that beginner phase of experimentation and playing around. That's not good, because now you're not making progressive overload and progressing on one specific single movement, scheme, and program. Chasing soreness. Oh my. Soreness is not an indicator of growth at all. Some people are like, yeah, bro, soreness feels good. Soreness is not an indicator of growth. I'm not going to pull up the studies to show that. I'm not going to show the correlation between delayed onset muscle soreness, blah, 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 blah. Soreness is not an indicator of growth. Soreness is an indicator of adaptation. You will be sore if you are constantly doing different movements because your body and your fibers are not, and your nervous system are not accustomed to those movements. That's what causes soreness. If you do a squat every day, which there's a guy called Squat Every Day, he gets sore sometimes, right? But you're like, oh, bro, if I squatted every day with high intensity, I would get sore. That guy gets so little soreness from squatting compared to me and you because his body is so accustomed to squatting. It is so used to squatting. Okay, chasing the pump. What is the pump? It's when your muscles get really filled with blood and really warm and really big from working out. And all that is blood flow. The pump is another word for blood flow. The pump is a boner for your muscles. And chasing that is cool. Because you're going to look really big in the mirror and it's going to be really great. But you're not always doing the most stimulatory thing while chasing the pump. And that's a fact. Not tracking progressive overload, not tracking your workouts. Low effort, so not taking anything near that top end RPE range and not coming close to failure. And then low volume, where like I said, less is more, but doing too little. Like, bro, you were in the gym for 10 minutes, now you're done? Like, yeah, bro, I'm tired, gotta go home. Novice traps. Okay, here's the novice summary. Then we're gonna get to intermediate. We're almost there. Ensure recovery is in check. This is a summary for everybody, all the way up to the elite level. This is called low-hanging fruits. Stole that from Bald Omni, man. So, choosing a split, prioritizing 2 of the 3 pillars. Adhering to the split and applying new techniques and movements. And sticking to those new techniques and movements and then not changing them. Then linear progressing until you have developed your strength base, which basically just means you find out how strong you are. Then you linear progress as far as possible with that base. Then once you hit that plateau, you found your base. You found your genetic newbie base. And then you can deplete those newbie gains. And now everything has slowed down. You're not getting bigger every day. You're not adding 5 pounds to your bench press every single week. Remember those days, guys? For those of you who are more advanced listening to this, remember those fucking days, bro. I remember I could bench 45 pounds. Then 2 weeks later, I'm benching 95 pounds. If I could have that rate of progress since then, I would be benching like 700, 800 pounds. But I'm not, because you hit that newbie base, and now you are an intermediate. An intermediate. I would consider myself a perma-intermediate, moving his way forward to the advanced stage. So that's why this guide is for beginners to intermediates. We did a lot of talking for the beginners and the novice stages because there's a lot you need to learn about. You need to learn about volume, what volume means, intensity, frequency, the novice traps, what to avoid, basic information, RPE, proximity of failure, the importance of training in muscular failure, the importance of consistency, the importance of adherence, the basic movements, exercise selection, progressive overload, choosing a split, the different splits, an asynchronous split, a synchronous split, the stairway to gains, experimentation, recovery, food and sleep, hydration, etc., 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 etc. Now you're an intermediate, there's way less slides. We're coming up on the end. There's literally way less slides. First slide for an intermediate, double progression. Double progression is after you're done with your newbie gains and you're done with linear progression for a movement, because you can LP standing for linear progression. You can LP a new movement. Anybody can do that. A movement you've never done before, you're going to have to LP it because you don't know how strong you are. So, double progression. Every set is making progress independent of the other set. Each set is making progress in 2 ways instead of 1. So, whereas linear progression is making progress in 1 way, which is usually weight, sometimes reps, each set is making progress during a session through adding weights and reps. This is called an evolving rep range. let's look at a double progression model. So here we had our guy. He found his strength base. His strength base was 85 pounds for bench press. Not gonna lie, that's kind of weak. But anyways, now he can't do any more. So we look at week 1. The 3 sets of 85 pounds. 11 reps, then 10 reps, then 9 reps. That's good. The fact that he's ramping down, here's the thing. If your second set is the same amount of reps as the first one, you're doing something wrong in terms of your training intensity and your proximity to failure. Because that means you're not depleting the maximum amount of energy in your muscles, okay? I'm just going to throw a bro science word, energy in your muscles, okay? Because you should be getting weaker as the sets progress because your body is getting more fatigued during the session. Okay, now that we know that. Then in the next week, the first set goes up to 12, the next set goes up to 11, the next set goes up to 10. This is kind of an LP, but then on the third week, the first set stays at 12, the second set goes up to 12. Oh, I thought you said the second one should always be... No, shut up. Shut up, because he's running a double progression. Then the third set is on 11. Okay, now on the fourth week, every single set is on 12. I thought you said that the second set should have less reps than the first set that you did because blah, 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 blah. No, he's running a double progression. Because now, after every single set in that range has hit the top end of the range, which is 12 reps, because his rep range is 8 to 12, he can now jump weight where he'll start at the bottom end of the range. So 9 reps or 8 reps. So once every single set has hit the top of the range, weight is then increased. So it's a much slower speed of progression. It's a much slower speed of progression, but reusing that set of 85 pounds times 12, that top end of the range, means that his body is getting more adapted to the stimulus of 85 pounds times 12. And the second set of 85 pounds times 12 is always going to be harder than the first set. And more so for the third. So, the RPE is increasing also. His proximity to failure is increasing as he goes down the range once he's hit the top end for week 4, if you look at week 4. Okay. Dynamic double progression. I'm not going to lie. I'm not fully understanding of dynamic double progression, but this is what my idea of it is. Basically, it's a little bit of a faster version than double progression. It's for people who are chasing those weight jumps. Every single set here's the difference between dynamic double progression and double progression. Here's the main difference. Every set doesn't have to hit the top edge of the range. So how we kept that 85 pounds times 12, once one set hits the top end of the rep range, it can then the next week go up in weight. But if the second set below that didn't hit the top end, it doesn't matter because it's completely independent. So maybe I was wrong about the first double progression model, the normal double progression. They are dependent on each other because it depends on the fact that every single set is at the top of the range. But on this, it doesn't matter. Every single set is independent of each other in terms of weight, okay? So as you can see on week 1 for his squat, he's really strong on squat compared to his bench. Maybe not. 205 times 5, 205 times 4, 200 times 5. So 2 205s and 1 200. Okay, he hit the top end of the range. His range was 3 to 4. And every single movement is going to have a different range. But usually for hypertrophy, the meme is 8 to 12. When I say meme is just the most common, most kind of agreed upon thing. Rep ranges really depend on experimentation and how your body responds to them. For me, on back, I use a lower rep range. I use like a 6 to 10. Same thing, and then a wider rep range too. The width of the rep range, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, he hit the top of the range on week 1 for the first set. So then he jumps up 5 pounds. and is at the bottom of the range. But the second set hits the top of the range, and the third set hit the top of the range on the first week, so now he moves back, and now he's at the bottom. So as you can see, every single set is independent of the other, and is progressing on its own way, and it's like every single set is doing its mini kind of LP, but over a longer period of time, and it's using a rep range, an evolving rep range. Okay. Rotating variations. This is a strength training kind of thing. Maybe not even a strength training kind of thing, but this is about adaptation. Your body will become accustomed to the stimulus from a single exercise over a long period of time. Not over a week session, not over even months, but over many months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, maybe 3 months, maybe a year. Maybe you can make progress on bench press for 2 years. I don't know. Making progress with double progression, dynamic double progression. But then once you hit that wall with double progression and then even dynamic double progression, you have to rotate. You have to rotate the variation. Conventionally, a program is going to be made where there are variations between the days. So on the primary bench day, this is a Berserk Method Baldani Man quote, you're going to be doing flat bench. Then on a secondary day, you're going to be doing dumbbell bench. You can do that. You can program that way. If you're doing a custom-made program, they're going to program it for you that way. But this just goes to say that rotating variations is important, and then training specificity. We already talked about specificity, but you wouldn't rotate a barbell bench with a chest fly because the movement isn't similar. It's not the same movement at all. Basically, you're doing the same movement. As an accessory is just the same movement, but with a different implement or a different tempo or a pause or a more range of motion or less range of motion. It's the same movement but modified. That's a highly specific movement. So for hypertrophy, specificity is not as important. That's another subjective, controversial statement. Okay, now, at the end of being an intermediate is the waiting game. You've learned the basic principles. You've followed the basic ideas. You've learned what your body likes in terms of volume, in terms of frequency, in terms of intensity. Here's the thing. Here's the low-hanging fruit, okay? These all have to do with recovery. So your body fat percentage. If you're lean, you make progress slower. Being fat, your body has more energy, bro science. Your body has more resources to grow muscle. If you are extremely lean, your body is in a state where it is fighting for its life to put a little bit of fat on your frame and to keep your system going. Fat is kind of important. No, fat is really important because without it, you would die. 0% body fat, even 3%, even 4% body fat doesn't exist. And it's a fault in the measurements we use to measure body fat percentage. Those body fat percentages don't exist. And I'd say anything below 5%, you are dying. You are dead. Okay, so that's the importance of having a body fat percentage. What is the optimal range? The optimal range, anything that works for you? No. I mean, that is true, but 11 to 21. I give that little 21 because really once you hit 20, you're looking kind of chubby. But 11 to 21, you don't have to have abs to be considered a well-seasoned lifter. It just depends on your goals. If you want to be more aesthetic, you can be on the lower range. If you want to be stronger, you have to be the highest possible body fat percentage you can maintain. If you want to be the strongest version of yourself, you want to lift as heavy as possible as you genetically can, you have to be the highest body fat percentage that you can be. And that's a fact. Look at strong men, look at like the world record deadlifts, etc., etc., etc. Okay, calorie surplus. This is another thing by Baldani Man. Being in a small, tiny calorie surplus and gaining tiny bits of weight over a long period of time is the best way to stimulate muscle growth. Period. Your body has a surplus of energy, and it's using that energy to progress. Period. That's it. It's really that simple, guys. If you are trying to be super lean, your body is degressing. These guys, when they prepare for shows and they get really lean, their training is at its lowest. They're deloading. Sometimes these guys don't even train. They just pump train. Training effort. This is a really big one. I don't know why it's just in the commas. I can make a whole video about this. Training close to failure is one of the most important things you can do, because the key factor, we don't talk about all the science bullshit, but the key factor to muscle growth is muscular tension. Some would say it's muscular damage. No, muscular tension. The reason why it's not muscular damage is because if I chop off my arm, is my bicep going to get bigger? No. I know that's not what that means, but no, fuck that. Muscular tension under load. The closer you are to failure, the highest amount of muscular tension there is, therefore the highest amount of stimulus, therefore the highest amount of fatigue, therefore the highest amount of recovery, therefore highest amount of growth. Blah, blah, blah. Now we have advanced techniques at the bottom. This is going into the advanced stage. Supersets, cluster sets, myo reps, rest pause, beyond failure, 2 times a day training sessions. Really, as an intermediate, you can use supersets and rest pause. I like to use beyond failure sometimes. Beyond failure just means going to muscular failure, or form failure, I should say, and then cheating a little bit and going beyond failure, or having a partner help you. And just beyond failure is kind of a meme. It doesn't really exist. It's just doing reps at failure. So at that same intensity, at that same effort, over and over again at the end of your RPE range. There's no such thing as going beyond failure because it's not possible. Okay. Rest pause also just means resting for a little bit. It's basically the same as a myo rep. That just means like taking a 10-second rest in between a rep so your body can collect more energy, bro science, and do another rep. And those sets are going to be really long, and that's kind of how I learned how to train. That's kind of how I train, with a rest pause, but we're not going to talk about me. Supersets goes back to time. Antagonist supersets. Here's what a superset is. Bicep curl, then you're going straight to do triceps. No rest in between. Why? Because when you're doing a bicep isolation, you're not working the tricep. Who knew? So you can train bicep, then run straight to triceps. Wait a minute. What about work capacity? What about fatigue? Well, don't superset heavy compounds with each other. I don't care if they're antagonists, don't superset them with each other. Superset isolations and superset an accessory with an isolation. So you can do dumbbell bench press, then run over and do bicep curls. There's nothing wrong with that. If your body likes it, you can do it. But what you can't do is do dumbbell bench press and then run over and do tricep press downs. Why? Because you just work your triceps. So a superset, and specifically an antagonist superset, is when you work a muscle with one movement in one set, then you run over, do another exercise with no rest in between from the last exercise, and do that exercise. You can do supersets that are agonist, which is, let's say you do a chest fly, then you do bench press together, no rest in between. That gets to more advanced stuff, and that also gets into kind of pump training. It's kind of gimmicky to me. I don't really understand agonist supersets. Maybe for activation, maybe for warm-ups and strength training. I don't know. Okay, here's the mindset. Lifting is absurdism. Albert Camus, lifting is absurdism. Here we see the myth of Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill for eternity to never reach the pinnacle. That's what lifting is as a natural lifter. You have to set an unobtainable goal. You just have to. Find a fictional physique. Find a crazy skyrocketing number. Aim for the stars, land on the moon, okay? And exceptional results are made through this mindset, an absurdist mindset. The normal fucking layman doesn't realize what he's capable of because he's not dreaming big. That's all it's about, is dream big and then train hard. Have that discipline. against all odds, have that discipline. Train hard every day. Eat right, sleep right, and live like a lifter who wants results. And it will set you above the standard nihilistic mindset of today, where people say, it's pointless. It's pointless. I'm not going to set time away from that because I'll never look like those guys. Yes, you can. Yes, you can if you just put your mind to it. But you have to follow the principles. And that's part of putting yourself ahead the competition, is following the principles, knowing the principles, and knowing what you're doing and knowing if it's optimal for you or not. Now we've gotten to the end. The Socrates quote: to follow the absurdist lifter mindset, no man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. So why do you need these principles? Like I said, it's a matter of time. You can be consistent to the least optimal thing ever and make gains in 500 years, I guess. But we don't have 500 years. We're all mortal. We're all human. We don't have a million years to train. So not wasting your time in the gym is just as important as setting that time up for the gym, if that makes any sense. I hope you liked this presentation. I really was rushing through it. It's my first gym informational presentation. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned enough for you to make a little bit of results. Somebody told me that every single slide here could have a full-length presentation about it. The levels of lifting could have a full-length presentation about them. This lifting and the knowledge and the science, not the science in terms of biology and the real scientists and the real researchers, no. Bro science goes really, really deep. And there's a lot to learn. And I love it. So if you don't want to love it, you can follow a custom-made program and just be consistent. Force yourself to be consistent. You don't ever have to ask, why am I doing this? Or what is the reasoning behind this?